Vanessa Zuisei Goddard is a writer, editor, and Zen teacher based in Playa del Carmen, Mexico. She's now the guiding teacher of the Ocean Mind Sangha. Zuisei is the author of Still Running, The Art of Meditation and Motion. We're so grateful to have her with us today, so I will now turn it over to Zuisei.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. It's so good to be with all of you today, sharing the Dharma that is good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end. Well, first of all, thank you to Chloe, to Sean, to Hoden for inviting me, and thank you to all of you for your practice and presence, especially, in the middle of the day, essentially. So thank you so much for being here. What I wanted to do is just take a few minutes to actually really come into this room, right? The virtual room, to come into our bodies, to align with our attention and our intention. I'd like to acknowledge our many ancestors, right? All the many practitioners, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas whose lives and whose dedication have made it possible for us to be here today. I'd like to celebrate, the wondrous set of circumstances that have allowed us to, one, be born in a human body, to encounter the Dharma and perhaps a teacher or teachers, and to have the time, the resources, the inclination, and the opportunity, right, to practice these profound teachings. Buddhism in general acknowledges the miracle it is that all of these circumstances have come together to make it possible for us to be here in this way. And so really acknowledging that, taking all of this into account, we very carefully and deliberately let go of what came before so that we can be fully present to one another just for this brief time, so that we can offer one another the gift of Dharma. So if we could sit quietly for a few minutes. May we purify an ocean of worlds. May we free an ocean of beings. May we see an ocean of Dharma. May we realize an ocean of wisdom. May we purify an ocean of activities. May we fulfill an ocean of aspirations. May we make offerings to an ocean of Buddhas. May we practice without discouragement for an ocean of eons. So this dedication is from the King of Prayers, and it's part of a practice dedicated to Samantabhadra, right? The primordial Buddha, the Bodhisattva of practice and meditation. And my own community is called the Ocean Mind Sangha. And so when I came upon this dedication, I thought it was both fitting and auspicious, a good way to begin a teaching. So today I wanted to speak about faith, right? One of the three pillars of Zen, as you know, great faith, great doubt, great determination, but I'll speak of it a little bit differently. In Christianity, faith is really the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. That's how it's defined in the Old Testament. And I would say that in Buddhism, faith is the substance of things recognized and the evidence of things not yet seen. Right? We sense the possibility as we come into practice of living a fuller, a richer, a more easeful life. And we trust that we will find the way. And following on the footsteps of those who've gone before us, we have faith in our ability to awaken to the way things are before we can even bring language to that knowledge. Right? There is something in us that recognizes that possibility. And so I want to speak about that faith, right? Our faith in the Dharma and in our capacity to practice it, as well as faith in our original rightness, right? Our original perfection. Often, when I come up against, some sort of obstacle, some situation that brings up my doubt, I ask myself, would I rather be right or would I rather be free? And now when it comes to faith, you can actually change that. And we could say, do we want to be right or do we want to believe that we're broken? And here, that rightness means wholeness. Right? So practicing faith is really wanting to be within our right, within our birthright, which is that wholeness. And it's reminding ourselves that we've always been of one piece, that we're always already complete. Now, it's not like any of us set out to feel broken. We don't decide to think, well, there's something wrong with me. But now and then we do believe it. Right? Something happens in our lives and we think there's something wrong. Or worse, we think I'm wrong. And maybe we don't think it consciously, we don't say it overtly, but we feel it. And something just feels off inside. And if we're not really in touch, we may think that the problem is outside. It's someone else's fault, and we lash out. When we look at our world, I think that this type of misunderstanding, it's behind much, if not all, of the violence we see in the world. So not knowing how to deal with the hurt that we feel, we hurt someone else. That's why I've always loved that section in the Saleka Sutta, the Discourse on Effacement. The Buddha is speaking to Kunda, Shariputra's brother, and he says to him, others will be harmful, we shall not be harmful here. Others will have thoughts of ill will, we shall not have thoughts of ill will here. And he's going through all of the precepts and more. But he's really saying, others will harm when harmed. We will not. We won't project, we will own. So much of that hatred, that harm, I think, comes from the unbearable softness of being, I call it. Because being human really requires such tenderness, doesn't it? It's infinitely fragile to be human, to live well. And at times it's unbearable to be that soft, that vulnerable. Fortunately, spiritual practice offers us kind of instructions for living, instructions for gentling ourselves into that softness. And it shows us that when our view is unskillful, our actions are detrimental. It shows us when we've gone to sleep a little bit, when things have gotten dull. Not because things are dull, but because something's happened. Our vision gets kind of blurry. Right? So practice sharpens our way of seeing and our way of living. And it also helps us to keep in mind and to periodically ask a question, which I think is really of utmost importance. How do we best live together? Because despite or with all our intelligence, our brilliance really in so many ways, our creativity, our resilience, we still haven't figured that out. How do we get along? So faith is really that capacity, that trust in our capacity to do that, to actually live well together, to create more space within and around ourselves, so we're not on top of ourselves, on top of each other. How to practice our thoughts, our feelings, our relationships, especially in the face of all the many storms that life presents us with. But I tell my students, sometimes you just have to strap yourself to the mast and ride out the waves of your mind, the waves of the world. A friend gave me that image many years ago, and she was referring, of course, to that story of Ulysses and the sirens. He strapped himself to the mast so he wouldn't throw himself overboard in the throes of his own desire. And so I think that this is what is needed, part of what is needed to practice. What is needed to stand on deck and stare at that incoming storm and not freak out. Or freak out, but keep going. Faith, right? Our trust in our ability to outlast the storm. And so Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche is one of the great Tibetan masters of the 20th century. He said that we go through 4 stages of faith on the path: clear faith, longing faith, confident faith, and irreversible faith. Clear faith is that moment when we see the wonderful qualities of the Buddha. We see them in a teacher, we see them in someone that we admire. And more broadly, I think it blooms when we do recognize the possibility in another of living, a fuller life, a fulfilling life, a peaceful life, a life based on liberation. And this recognition compels us to look for another way, right? To get there ourselves. In this famous text, The Questions of King Milinda, a monk, Nagasena, says to the king, a group of people are gathered on the edge of an overflowing stream, and they want to go to the other side, but they're afraid. And of course, this side, this shore is samsara, the other shore is nirvana. Afraid, they just stand there. They look at the stream, they look at each other, they don't move. And then one of them comes along, they assess the situation, they take a running leap and they jump. And seeing the others say, it can be done. And they also jump. By faith, they cross over the stream, says Nagasena. By earnestness, the sea of life. By steadfastness, all grief they still. By wisdom, they are purified. Oh, it can be done, we realize, and then we'll go about doing it. This is faith by proxy. Then there's longing faith. And that really comes directly out of that first, of clear faith, right? Because we see in another the virtues of wisdom and compassion. We see their clarity, we see their kindness, and we long for those qualities in ourselves. Shortly before I met my first teacher, Daido Roshi, we were working together one morning, and I was walking behind him. We were going back to the monastery for lunch from his studio where we were working. And, Daido Roshi was a tall man. He was gangly, and he was always kind of slightly stooped, like many tall men are. And he was walking right in front of me. He was just kind of ambling along, and his loose jeans were kind of sliding down his butt, cigarette dangling from his hand, utterly at ease with himself. And I looked up at him in a moment and I thought, I want that. I want that ease. It was a time in my life when I felt so deeply ill at ease in my own skin. I so badly yearned for that kind of self-assurance, that utter lack of self-consciousness, because I was just beginning to study Buddhism. So I didn't really know about suffering and the end of suffering. Well, I knew about my own suffering. I knew about my own pain. And I saw in him the possibility of something else. And that's when I decided he would be my teacher. Very far from the mystical experience, so many people have when they describe first meeting their teacher. But for me, it worked. I saw in him the possibility of that freer life, and I wanted it. At first for me, and then later on, I wanted it for others too. This is faith by aspiration. Then there's confident faith. Gradually, we become more familiar with the workings of our mind, more attuned to those, those particular quirky thoughts that each of us has. And slowly we develop the confidence that maybe we can practice, maybe we can live from those good qualities that we're beginning to cultivate. Here we start to accept that despite or because of our quirkiness or our outright neurosis, we can wake up. Because we start to actually accept that awakening is already in us. We see that we can be clear and we can be kind because from the beginningless beginning, we've always been clear and kind, that is our natural home. Right? So this is confidence that we can realize what has always been true, what has always been ours. And before we doubted, before we weren't sure. As you know, Master Dogen said that if we weren't already a person of suchness, we couldn't realize suchness. And so no matter how hard we tried, no matter how hard we worked, we would never be able to become what we're not. In this lifetime, I'm not going to turn into a panther or a stream or an astrophysicist or a concert pianist. Not this time around. But I can be Zuisei fully. I can completely inhabit my own being. How? By slowly seeing and working through that which gets in the way of Zuisei, of my completeness. By slowly seeing and working through that which affirms Zuisei, what gives Zuisei life. And so it's a kind of alignment or realignment with the way things are, with the way we are. And so confident faith, it lets us know, it assures us that wisdom is in fact within our reach. It lets us know that we can practice, that we can realize, and we can live the Dharma. And the nice thing about it is that the more we practice, the more we know this, and the truer it is. Not because it's ever false, but because it just becomes more embodied. So in that sense, this is renewable faith. And then finally, there's irreversible faith. No matter how long the path, no matter how difficult it may seem, we know. At this point, we know we're going to travel it because we can't imagine living any other way. And Daido Roshi also taught me about this. He used to say that if a group of anthropologists all of a sudden unearthed some documents long buried, and they proved irrefutably that the historical Buddha never existed, he said, this wouldn't shake my faith in the Dharma. Not one bit. He said, because I have my own practice and experience to go by. That is all I need. Which, of course, is what the Buddha himself said. We don't rely on the Buddha, the person, we relies on the Dharma and our capacity to practice it. And this doesn't mean we don't have doubts, because at some point we will. Those of us who've practiced long enough, we know at some point we won't be sure if the path is right. We won't be sure if we can walk it. We won't be sure if the place where it's taking us is where we actually want to go. And so we'll doubt ourselves, we'll doubt the teacher, we'll doubt the Dharma. But we don't have to let that doubt stop us. Instead, we can doubt the doubt. We can say to ourselves, is this so? We doubt so many other things in our lives. Why not doubt that doubt? Because at this point, we've seen also that we don't have to let worry or insecurity or fear of failure stop us. I think of that wonderful story of Kuan Yin, who makes this vow, right, to save all beings, and goes about doing that. Works hard, and it is done. And then she's walking away, turns around, and sees the suffering has bloomed all over again. And she's so overwhelmed, her head explodes. I've always wondered, who wrote that image, but they knew, they knew exactly what this is like. Certainly the work of a teacher. Her head explodes, and then Amitabha gives her another head, right, on top of that first one. And this happens 10 times. And so there's one of those iconic statues of the many-armed Kuan Yin with the 11 heads. And at the very end, Amitabha says, okay, well, I'll help you a little bit more. And he places himself on top of that last head. I think almost as a symbol of this, of that irreversible doubt, irreversible faith. I think of my teacher now, Shugen Roshi, who often says a phrase something like, how else would I live my life? When somebody points to the challenges of the path, to the iron yoke of the teacher. And he says, how else would I live my life? Not in the sense of I don't have a choice, but what other choice would fulfill my aspiration, would fulfill my vow? And so at this point, we can't go back. We have come this far. And so we're no longer daunted, or we're daunted and we recover because we know what we have to do and we know how to do it. And so we know it's just a matter of time. It's a matter of patience and perseverance. I say this, to people when I'm teaching someone meditation for the first time. I say to them, you need 5 things. You need persistence, and then you need patience, 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 patience. It is not that we will not get discouraged. It's that we always have the ability to continue. This is unstoppable faith. So this is, in sum, clear, longing, confident, and irreversible faith. But there's one more type of faith. And I think ultimately it's the only one we need. And that is good enough faith. Faith good enough to get us going on the path. If you've ever seen one of Yayoi Kusama's installation, right, her infinity mirrors, there's one light. I mean, there's many, but if you just focus on the one light being projected infinitely, that is really how faith works. It's really enough, that initial spark that says, what if? What if there's another way? What if there's more to what I've been seeing so far? What if what I hear, what I read about this other way of seeing myself, seeing the world is actually true? What if I try? So I think good enough faith really is, circling back, that really is that faith in ourselves. And faith in our capacity to practice. Faith in our capacity to see when it is difficult to see. To find a way when we can't see that way, when it seems like everything is covered in fog. And to trust, yes, but beyond that, there has to be something. And I think it's a good enough faith to know that we're already where we need to be. And so all we need to do is to take that step, to begin to live from that knowledge. An image that I really love, and I won't tell the whole story, but it's of a bricklayer who's laying a path into the sea. It comes from an Ursula Le Guin story. And he has this sense, it's the end of the world. And he has this sense that beyond where he can see, the limit of what he can see, is a set of islands. And he knows that's where he's going to find his salvation. But he has no way to get there. And so he knows, what do I do? He thinks to himself, what do I know? I know how to build. And he decides to build a road straight into the ocean. Foolish, those who saw him would say. Crazy, irrelevant. But there's something in him that is sure. And so he takes brick by brick and he sets it down straight into the ocean. And one day, at the very edge of the world, he goes to the end of that road and he takes another step. Rainer Maria Rilke said it's a little bit of a poem called Let This Darkness Be a Bell Tower. He says, quiet friend who has come so far, feel how your breathing makes more space around you. Let this darkness be a bell tower and you the bell. As you ring, what batters you becomes your strength. You know that koan? How do you stop the ringing of a bell. I mean, he says it so beautifully. We let the darkness be a bell tower, and we become the bell. We let the storm be everything, and we become the wave. And right there, what batters us becomes our strength. Like this pianist, one of my students told me about an article in the New York Times about a pianist had terminal cancer. And he had been, he loved this one piece. It was a Schubert piano trio, piano, cello, and violin. And he wanted, before he died, to really perfect it. And the article describes how in the notation for this piece, Schubert wrote, there's a section that is a funeral march. And there's a piece where it says that the violin and the cello should play triple forte, right? Fortissimo, very, very loud. And then it says when they can't go any louder, crescendo. How? How do you do that? How do you keep going from that highest point? How do you go as far as you can go and then keep going? And you know, we do this in our bows, in the run that leads to the bows. I don't know if this is the case for many of you. So at the end of the training day, in at least my monasteries and mountain monastery, we would finish with what we called a run on the inkin, right on the bell, that led to the three bows, the Sangha's three prostrations. And it starts very slow, ching, 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 giving everybody a chance to stand, giving the teacher a chance to stand. If the teacher is a monastic, they're laying out their zagu, their bowing mat. And everybody is getting ready and standing to do those three bows. And so the run is getting faster and faster and louder until it crescendos. Ching, 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 and everybody bows. And when I was trained to do this, the head liturgist said to me, the run should have such energy that at the end you can do nothing but bow. And I took it very seriously. You know, I practiced and I put everything I had into it. And so then I was doing it, and then I noticed that the teachers were looking at me, and it looked like they were like repressing smiles. And then I realized, you know, I was frowning really hard. I was concentrating really, really hard. And I was hitting the bell so hard that I was starting to levitate, you know, from my seat. It's like everything, every cell in my body was vibrating. But in a sense, that is what's required, right? We become the bell, we become the ringing until there's neither ringing nor bell, nor Zuisei, nor anything. And at that point, what batters us becomes our strength. At that point, the storm is no longer a storm because it's no longer an obstacle, because it's no longer a storm. Clear faith, longing faith, confident faith, and a reversible faith. And in the end, good enough faith. Good enough to begin, good enough to continue. Recognizing the miracle that it is to be here. As I said at the beginning, to want to practice and to be able to practice. To take one step and then another, trusting that if we keep doing that with care, with attention, the rest really takes care of itself. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful talk. We can now open it up for questions. You can raise your electronic hand or just wave. I should be able to see that.
No, I can't see. Unfortunately, I can only see myself and then a few of you up at the top.
Oh yeah, I will. I can see them and point them out.
Yeah, so you're welcome to bring a question, comment, regrets, misgivings. And I can actually throw in a question maybe to get the wheels rolling. What is your own relationship with faith? What is your own relationship with faith on the path? Gato.
Looks like Anne. Yeah, Gato.
Thank you for your beautiful talk. I'll answer your question first. I guess my relationship with faith on the path vacillates between all of the types of faith you spoke of. And I guess I lump them into good enough faith. I guess depending upon the situation, any one of those is good enough for the situation, and it changes from situation to situation. I read your book, Still Running, and I'm a runner. And I realized while I was reading that the problem in my running practice was my lack of faith in just the process of running. And I wanted to thank you for the book. It really helped me kind of rethink and re-clarify why I run, how I run, when I run. And it made that part of me much more enjoyable and less rigid, I think. Less rigid and more faith-based.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes any sense. So
yes, I think you're pointing to, the kind of maybe sometimes the gap or the difficulty that we come up against really in any long-term practice. I've often thought that it's not that we lack will, for example, or that we lack discipline to do the things that we want to do or say that we want to do. I really feel that the snag comes when we're not really clear about what it is that we want to do, why we want to do it, what do we feel, what do we believe it will give us, right? So when that is not clear, we waver, and then we lose faith, we lose trust in ourselves. And so it's a matter of kind of really aligning. I said at the beginning, of aligning our attention and our intention or our aspiration. In some ways, the question why in practice is not so useful. I think in other ways is extremely useful. The why of what we do, why we do what we do. For example, just sitting in meditation, sitting zazen. If somebody says to me, I really want to practice, but I have a very hard time getting up early to do it. My first question is why? Why do you want to sit? And usually it begins with very superficial answers. Well, because, I know that it's good for me, it will make me a little bit calmer. It's good for you, it's very vague. What does that actually mean? What will that look like in your life? Because if all of a sudden you find that you're sitting and your mind is agitated or is, you're talking to yourself, not more than before, you're just noticing how distracted you were. What will make you keep going if you don't have the immediate result right? And so I always say, you have to dig deep. Like you get up every morning to spend time quietly with your body, with your mind, with your attention, and then make that very simple, very concrete, and very short, so you can remember it. I always say, phrase it in such a way that you can explain it to your 5-year-old cousin, or you can explain it to your Aunt Mary in Ohio, who knows nothing about Buddhism. It can't, if you're basing it on what you've read, what you've heard, is not going to last. And so I think there's this aspect of faith that I was referring to as alignment. Aligning, in this case, your intention, your commitment, your discipline, your aspiration, bringing everything into line. Because then really, when that happens, as I said, the rest kind of takes care of itself. You just have to show up deliberately, earnestly.
Thank you.
But you're right in as you said at the beginning, to take that good enough faith can encompass the other 4. Because it's not even, I say to my students, we don't have to be heroic. We just need enough to begin. Just enough to begin. That's all. Gakyo, so nice to see you. Hello.
You're muted, Gakyo.
I'm finding myself feeling kind of rattled at the idea of good enough faith. And there's times when my faith is this powerful force. If I'm in a service position, if I'm in the middle of session, if I'm in Dokusan, if I'm helping students sew their rakusus, it's really solid. And there's other times that it's not in the forefront of my mind, and it feels like it wavers, and I get this idea that I need to get back to the full gale of it to have it matter. And the idea that, like good enough parenting and attachment theory, that a small amount is enough to keep you moving in the direction of your path. Mm-hmm. Is it kind of hits the part of me that gets out of whack because I need to go all in on things that I'm doing, and just a foot in the water never feels like I'm actually there. And how many pieces of my life is good enough, really good enough and okay, and I'm in it, and that I don't have to be forcing something or waiting for something a big wind to blow me from behind, that there's something subtler that can have power.
Yeah, I think this, part of what you're touching on relates to how we understand, just even the term good enough. I think we often hear that as less than the whole thing. And that's why I kind of link this to, the dharma that is good in the beginning, good in the middle, or good in the end. In this sense, that goodness is all encompassing. And I believe it was Yasutani Roshi who said something like, you only need 1%. You don't need 100% of faith, of perseverance, of determination. You just need 1%. And I found that incredibly helpful in a time not that long ago when I was really struggling with some physical stuff. And I had this mysterious fatigue. Nobody could figure out what it was. And there were days when just getting out of bed was a thing. And I remember thinking to myself, I only need 1%. 100% of that 1%. I'm going to, if I need to work as I'm lying down, if I need to sit for a shorter period, but I'm going to do that completely. And so I kind of took the pressure off of myself of needing to, one, perform, and two, fulfill some kind of internal, mostly unconscious expectation. And I thought, can I be fully in my life as it is now, which is not what I would like. It's not ideal by any stretch. Can I be in it fully? Can I be that fatigue fully? Can I be the walk that I am able to take fully? And can I work with those thoughts that say, not good enough, not good enough, not enough? You know, so I basically did what a friend of mine, a fellow teacher, calls a chiropractic right view adjustment. You know, I adjusted how I saw that good enough, and let it be everything, let it fill everything. And then there was no problem. A day with 2 naps, a day where I felt like my old self, it was all a good day, you know, as Master Yunmen would say. So, you know, I think it's trusting in that fullness, trusting in that wholeness, and trusting also that the fact that you're not able to do as much as you did yesterday really doesn't mean anything. It just means your capacity today is different from what it was yesterday. And it will be different tomorrow. We know that. We know that is the nature of things. So can I just stay with it? Can I be persistent? Can I just very lovingly be present to myself as I am in this moment? I mean, we know this. We know these teachings. So can I actually show up for myself in that way? Hoden?
Hi. Thank you for the talk. You choked me up with the image of Daido Roshi, and I've seen that quite a few times of his nature really being right on top. It's beautiful. The thing that I am curious about is associating aspiration with faith. I feel, for me, I look at when I aspire for something, it's almost more of a lack of faith. And I'm wondering how you see those as being the same. How are they related? Or
Can you say more about that? I had never thought of aspiration that way. Can you say more about that? Why is that a lack of faith?
well, I find my aspirations with music was a source of pain, a source of suffering, a source of self defeat. And so I've always looked at aspiration, my wanting to aspire to be something else or something more, as desire.
Mm.
And maybe I can reframe it and see it differently.
Yeah, and that can be very painful, you know, to have a wish, to have a dream, to have a vision of who we want to be, how we want to be in the world, and to have that not come about for different reasons. I think when I was speaking of aspiration, primarily I was referring to bodhicitta, right? That the arousing of the bodhi mind, of the desire to wake up for myself and for all beings. And so it's this deep wish, this longing wish, this deep desire to be free and to have others be free. And for me, it's completely married, if you will, to that faith. Because if I didn't believe that that was possible, it would be crazy for me to do what I do. I mean, I spend my days essentially speaking about, writing about the possibility of living a life of liberation. And so if I didn't believe it was possible, what the hell am I doing? And that is something I've reflected on before, that for some reason I was fortunate enough to have a sense early on, before I even knew about Buddhism, before I knew of the path, that there had to be another way, that there had to be a better way to live a life than what I was seeing, that there had to be more important things to be spending my time and energy on, that what people were telling me was important. And so, and I was fortunate enough to just encounter the Dharma early. You know, I was really a teenager, I was really in college. And even though I have doubted myself a number of times on the path, I have doubted my own capacity to practice. Fundamentally, I haven't. Fundamentally, I still have that faith, and I always have. And so I've never considered, well, I'm just going to stop sitting. I'm just going to stop practicing. This isn't working. I have thought, you know, maybe I should do this differently. Maybe I should do that differently. But I've never thought liberation is not for me. It's not out of my reach. It's out of my reach. And I think this too was something that Daido Roshi, he actually gave that very much to me. There were times when I just was struggling mightily in my training, my practice, and he treated me as a Buddha. Not just me. I mean, he treated his students that way, but he really treated me as a Buddha. And so I kept thinking, well, he's seeing something. I'm not seeing it, but he's seeing it. I trust him. So I guess I'll keep going. And Shugen Roshi has done the same in different ways, but he has done the same for me. At times where I was in a dark hole, they basically said, no, you can do this. Like Bodhisattva never disparaging in the Lotus Sutra. I would never dare disparage you because you too are a Buddha. So that's how I think of that union of faith and aspiration.
Thank you.
So I had asked, as we were starting the question and answer, you know, what is your own relationship to faith? You know, one of the things that I find very useful is to think of practice as that I'm in relationship with it, right? That I'm in relationship to the altar that I have in my practice space. I have a relationship with the Buddha image on the altar, but the Buddha, the person, the historical person, the metaphysical being that especially the Mahayana Sutras describe. Because if I'm going to follow the Buddha's teachings, I want to be engaging with them, right? And hopefully I'm understanding a little bit more as time goes on, you know, as I develop, as I grow, and hopefully my seeing grows a little bit. And so it's a very active, very dynamic relationship. And so whenever I think of any teaching, like the three pillars, great faith, great doubt, great determination, when I think of the four immeasurables, of course, the Noble Eightfold Path, you know, any teaching, that I try to be very much in an active relationship with it. And so that's why I ask, you know, when you reflect on your own, and maybe you have no faith, maybe you don't think of it, and that would be, you know, that would be fine too. But so that's the inquiry, you know, what do I think of it, and how do I think of it? Do I practice it? How do I practice it? Do I want to? You know? Yes, Brian.
Let's see if I can. Okay, I think it's working. Can you hear me? Okay, good. I was having problems. I'm deeply appreciative of this event here. This is the first ZPI thing I've been a part of today. So I'm usually involved with Pacific Zen Institute, and I saw this. I'm like, oh, this is wonderful. and what is my relationship to faith? I mean, this is just so perfect because, um, I'm a parish minister in the Unitarian Universalist tradition, so it's kind of everywhere. But I also burned out completely in my Zen practice, and it was very much how you reminded us of the story of Guan Yin, her head exploding. Every time turning around, the head exploding, and someone else is like, "Okay, let's patch you up here and see if you get this is good enough for right now." Um, and just burned out, and had to step away from so many things, and health issues popping up from all the stress, and suddenly, and again, things are just lining up. In PZI, it's all koan practice, right? So one day, just stop the sound of the distant temple bell came, as I'm burnt out, I'm angry, I'm ready to just leave it all. I don't want to even think about Zen. I don't want to even think about my parish responsibilities and the pandemic. And suddenly it just came back, and came all flooding in, and good enough was okay. Because I realized I was trying to strive for perfection, and realizing that, if only I could get to that sense of perfection, it'll all be okay. And it just compounded that burnout. So, deeply appreciative of good enough, and realizing good enough is the practice too. So thank you for that, and also going for a run after this. So it's all lined up today. So thank you.
We forget perfectio actually means completeness. It does not mean perfectionism. We have turned it into that. To never fail to cover the ground upon which we stand, that is perfection. We never fail. And when we fall, it's that same ground that we used to stand. It is that same, it is the burnout. It is your body telling you, you're not going to stop, I'm going to stop you. I think that's what happened, with me as well. And it's unfortunate, right, that we're so stubborn that sometimes that is what it takes. Or sometimes we're earnest, we're zealous. We want to do good, we want to be of service. And it's not even that I forget, because I feel, that I take decent care of myself, but there will always be more. There will always be more to do. Sometimes people say to me, but is it enough to practice? From one perspective, no, of course not. I mean, look at the world. I mean, there are so many things that need our attention, that need our deep, deep care. So in one sense, no, sitting on your cushion is definitely not enough. In another sense, can you make what you do fill everything? Someone who does koan practice, that is what we're asked to do time and time again. Once again, that is when good enough becomes, the good extends everywhere, extends in all directions. So it's not a matter of measuring anymore. The measurement is relevant and really a waste of our time and energy. So come back. If you can give 1%, you give 1% fully. If you can give 50, if you can give 110, understanding that is in our, I can't imagine regretting something more than holding back. To look back at my life and think, I sort of did it, because I was afraid. That I would regret, I think, always. And so I strive as best I can to be in my life, to be in my days fully. One of my favorite koans, which I quote in my book, is Dongshan's Each Stitch. Shenshan is sewing, and Dongshan says, what are you doing? Shenshan says, I'm sewing. What is sewing? Each stitch follows the other. If you say so, well, how would you say it, my Dharma brother? And Master Dongshan says, each stitch is like the whole world exploding. Exactly. Exactly. And maybe it explodes in a really bad way. Okay, acknowledge that, clean it up, and keep going. But let it be all encompassing. Because then, what would you regret? So I'm on a campaign to change our perception of good enough. Oh, Alexandra.
Yes. So I feel I've had a really strong faith from the beginning of practice. It's been very deep in me. But I also have this conflict, probably because I have a science background, that just regales against the idea of faith. And so I was wondering, does over the course of time and experience, does that ease that conflicting back and forth feeling? Will that ease over time as my experience of faith continues?
Well, let me ask you, what do you think you're having faith in?
The practice.
And how does that conflict with your scientific background?
Because my science background says there must be proof. And the proof of practice is that I'm an entirely better person when I practice than when I'm not. But then my science background says, well, that's no proof. That's just your opinion. So.
And the people around you, what do they say after these 2 to 3 years of practice? We've been practicing together.
I'm not even the same person. That's what they say.
Yeah. Maybe you can enlarge your definition of scientific proof, which of course can never be separated from the observer anyway. So is there such a thing as purely, absolutely objective experience? Mm-hmm. And I would also say that when it comes to something like, well, I was going to say when it comes to something like practice, but really when it comes to your life, do you really want somebody else to tell you this is working? Like my teacher saying, the Buddha never existed. Okay, I mean, it would be a little bit of a bummer, but I still would get up every morning and sit. I still would speak about the things that I speak of. It's like all these experiments that they're doing now, to see, neuroplasticity. Meditation enhances neuroplasticity in the brain, and it lowers your blood pressure. And, I mean, that's great. That's wonderful. But I don't need somebody to tell me that practice has changed my life. I don't need a set of papers showing that my life is better in almost, possibly every way, because I live it. I live it every day. So I guess you can, as I said, enlarge your definition of that scientific proof, but you could also just say, is this so? I'm practicing, enthusiastically every day. What is my life like? How do I feel? And then, yes, I think the doubt that is there, the question or the hesitation, I do feel, I think that is why there's that progression from clear to longing to confident faith, because it does take time. It does take time for that faith to be cemented, if you will, in our mind, in our heart. Some of it just takes time. But each day, you're taking those actions that are making that faith stronger, in fact. So we don't have to fill the time, we don't have to be here until 12:30 my time, Central Time, but I do want to give everybody a chance to say something if they would like to. It's really nice, by the way, to see some familiar faces, new faces, and known faces. Zenki, very nice to see you. Egan and Kimu, although I can't see you, it's really nice that you're here. Thank you for being here. Eric. Yes, Zenki. So nice to see you.
Thank you. So nice to see you too. It's amazing. It really is. All the references to Daido and practicing with you back then and hearing about Shugen. And so I was thinking about that, how would I want to answer that question you're talking about? And it does go back to them and my roots. And what a wonderful foundation I was given for my practice by them and Daido. And, when he was done, I had another teacher that was just a super amazing person, Blanche Hartman at San Francisco Zen Center. So I had really excellent goalposts on the way. And since that time, and Blanche passed away too, and since that time, I've really struggled with teachers in the American Zen pantheon. I was just practicing with a Soto Zen teacher, and I had to break away from him. There was a comment made about Jews and just, crazy stuff coming out of these teachers or people that call themselves teachers in the American Zen pantheon now. I've had 3 of them that I've had really deep sorrow in practicing with them, because as you know, practicing with a teacher requires an intimacy, a spiritual intimacy. And so when those experiences break off, it's such a deep betrayal, and it's such a what's happened to me is I've suffered deeply psychologically, and now that it's happened again, my faith is so rocked, and here I am, back to sitting solo again. And there's nothing wrong with that, with sitting solo. I've done it, many times over the years. But my faith in the practice has suffered this time. And I find myself not sitting. And I also find, which is a beautiful thing, is that the practice becomes my very life. And you talked about this in your talk today about where your own life becomes the very practice, or your very life is the practice. So my faith is kind of skating right now on thin ice. And but it's not the faith in Zen.
Mm-hmm.
That remains very solid. That's that foundation that I have. And as you say, how can you do anything else? How can you practice anything else? So I'm waiting to come out of that fog that you alluded to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, I think it's one of the hardest moments on the path, which I think is inevitable if we do it for long enough, when we are deeply, deeply disappointed by the teacher. I think it's a necessary step on the path because it's when we become very clear about why it is that we're doing it. You know, I think of the couple of times, 2 or 3 times that it happened in my own practice, and I was rocked, and in one sense was also strengthened by the fact of realizing, yes, but the reason I'm doing this is not for them, it's for me. And then rocked more by my own mistakes, my own faults, and then realizing, oh, yes, I too am flawed, sometimes deeply, deeply so. But for some reason, I was able, I think because I have had this kind of unshakable faith in the Dharma, that I was able, after a time, to grieve that disappointment, including the disappointment in me, and to continue. So I think I would say, you know, to just really give it time. I was speaking to my Sangha the other day about letting go and feeling that one of the steps, really important steps, is grieving. And I had made it the 3rd step, but it really should be the 2nd. You know, you acknowledge what is happening as the 1st step very honestly. And 2nd is you grieve before you can surrender, before you can really let go. You know, the deep disappointment, the gap between what is and what you would like, you know, all of it. When I first left Zen Mountain Monastery, I had been there for 23 years. That first year, I sat on my own, but I could not even think of going to like a Zen center. I couldn't. I mean, I would think about it and I was like, I can't. And so I joined, I sat with Quakers, I went to a synagogue, I sat with a Christian group, they did a contemplative prayer. And so I still wanted to sit in Sangha and to sit in silence, but I just needed a break, you know, from Zen. And then naturally, and I wasn't even sure, it's like, I don't know, is it really Buddhism? Because I've always been interested in Christianity as well. But slowly, very naturally, I gravitated back to my home. But I gave it time. No, and I didn't push it, I didn't force it. So I would really give yourself that time and to mourn the loss of those relationships, because especially when it happens repeatedly, I mean, it's like, you know, it's like one bruise after another. So it takes time to heal from that. But hopefully you can maintain that connection to your own practice. You know, however that needs to look in this moment of change, of transition, to stay connected, you know, to what brought you there to begin with.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And Richard says, anybody, he wrote Max Planck, anybody who has been seriously engaged in scientific work of any kind realizes that over the entrance to the gates of the Temple of Science are written the words, "You must have faith." Thank you so much for that quote, Richard. See, Alexandra? Anybody else?
Well, if there are no more comments or questions, maybe we could close.
Sure. I always do a very short dedication at the end, if that's okay.
Yeah.
May the merits of these teachings and our time together benefit all beings. May these words help and not harm. May they clarify and not confuse. May they self-liberate leaving no trace behind.